Are the New York Giants actually tanking? We're going to take a look at that possibility and much more coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my newcomers, to my everydayers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. It is appreciated. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase letters to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. You don't even need to win your lineup to receive the $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, folks, for the longest time, I've been, I don't know, you could say in denial, you could say, not in touch with reality, whatever you want to call it. But on today's show, I'm going to actually explore the possibility if the Giants are tanking this season. Now, I don't believe they are tanking on purpose if they are tanking at all. I also don't believe in tanking, period. I think it just goes against everything that, I, as a competitor, when I played competitive sports, and even now when I play, a board game or if I go bowling with my husband, it just goes against everything that I know to be true. And I'm like, why would a team, why would anybody go through practice or the rigors, especially at the NFL level, of tanking? Why would anybody go through, the practice, the preparation, and just putting in the time if they didn't want to put their best effort out there to win? So it just never really made sense to me. So that said, I'm going to take a look at some things that could potentially make you think that maybe this team is tanking. So we'll take a look at that. Then in segment 2, we are going to take a look at the injury updates that were revealed on Monday and basically how the injuries continue to expose the flaws in the roster building process of this team. So that's segment 2. And then in segment 3, is Brian Daboll basically done after this year? He's still the head coach. I expect he will be the head coach for the rest of the season. It doesn't really make a difference at this point to make a change, but I think we realistically have to take a look at, can he be saved? And, is he necessarily a package deal with general manager Joe Shane? So we'll take a look at that as well. Again, welcome on into everybody. Let's jump in. All right, tanking. Now, again, I am not in favor of it. I don't believe in it. That said, I'm not going to sit here and say that I deny that it doesn't happen. It does happen. The idea is not to get caught. The idea is to not make it look as obvious. But, when I look at some of the things the Giants have done over the last several weeks, especially during this losing streak, which is now at 8 games, I can't help but wonder if maybe there's a part of them that maybe is tanking. Maybe they want that, a top draft pick, first or second pick overall. I think right now they're currently number 2 overall. Because having a pick that high would give them the option of taking a quarterback if there's a quarterback that they like, or trading down with a quarterback needy team and getting more draft picks. So, having a high draft pick can potentially give the Giants more options, if you will, as to how they proceed in rebuilding or fixing this team that has just been an absolute mess this season. So let's talk about some of the clues, if you want to call them clues. Maybe you're going to think this is a stretch, but these are just little things that I wrote down that had me saying, maybe I'm not accurately looking at this with eyes wide open. So here we go. It was it came out, on Sunday. If you blinked and you missed it, but Tommy DeVito was put in the game for one play. And I initially thought, "Oh, okay, maybe Drew Lock got dinged or maybe there was an equipment problem and they had to send DeVito in there rather than to take a timeout." But Brian Daboll in his post-game press conference said, "Well, we had some plays in there for Tommy DeVito." Now, answer me this. How many teams that are, steady and, on secure ground at the quarterback position, how many teams actually rotate quarterbacks? You don't see that very often. You do see it when a team really doesn't have a long-term answer at quarterback, or when the team is just really going down the tubes and right now they're just kind of, throwing up their hands and saying, "Okay, let's just throw caution to the wind and see what happens?" So that was something that definitely caught my eye and made me wonder, what's going on here? Another thing that has kind of, raised my antenna is the growing injury list. Now, have you ever noticed that when a team is just not doing well, and I'm talking specifically this Giants team, when they have not done well, have you ever noticed how the injury list just seems like it's spiraling out of control? Well, this list is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you've got guys that are now becoming regulars on the injury report every week. And that's concerning because, you ask yourself, okay, if this team was in contention with some of these guys who are dealing with bumps and bruises that are landing them on the injury report, would they actually, you know, be listed as doubtful or questionable or out? So I don't know, guys. I mean, the injury report, it just seems like it's getting bigger and bigger. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the injury report, where it stands in the next segment. But that was something that certainly, caught my eye. Another thing, and this is a big one, especially, it just seems from the outside looking in, there has been a refusal by Dable to change. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, disclaimer, I am not in the building for meetings. I don't get to see the entire practice. I can only go by, what I have seen and what I know to be true. So I'm talking specifically about Dable is still calling the plays. All right. If you're that desperate to win and you know that you have to change things up, why not say, "Hey, Mike Kafka, I'm talking about, why don't you take a crack at calling the plays?" Or "Hey, Shay, why don't you take a crack at calling the plays?" But no, Dable is sticking to his guns on that. You can also talk about the passing game that they continue to seem to stick with. It just seems like, Dable is intent on running a passing offense as opposed to mixing it up a little bit more. And I'll give you some stats. The Giants are averaging 185.5 yards per game, which is 28th for amongst all the passing offenses in the league. Over their last three, since basically they moved on from Daniel Jones, they're averaging 171 yards per game, which is 30th in the NFL. So wouldn't you say at this point, okay, our quarterback situation is a mess. Maybe we want to go and integrate a little bit more of the run game here? Well, maybe it's because their offensive line is banged up. Maybe it's because the way the offensive line was initially built, it was not built to be more of a run blocking offensive line. For example, you look at John Runyon Jr., much better pass blocker than run blocker. So there could be any number of reasons, but the point being is they're sticking with the passing offense. And we've seen instances where, and I mentioned some of them on the show yesterday, where it's been short yardage, second and short, third and short, where you have more options. And it's like you can almost set your watch to the fact that they're going to pass the ball as opposed to maybe run the ball. So that's another aspect. So yeah, these are some of the things that have me wondering if they're maybe tanking without tanking. Now, obviously, they're not going to come right out and say, "Yep, we're going to tank. We're going to lose all our games," because that would just not be cool. And plus, it's compromising the integrity of the game. And I think they could get in trouble if it comes out, if it ever were to come out, I should say, that they were purposely, losing. So I don't believe that to be true. And this is why I struggle with the concept of tanking. But You look at all the things they're doing versus not doing, and that includes the wins, and you sit there and you say, "Okay, have they found a quarterback that they really, really love and they really wanna get, but they don't wanna have to trade up for him?" And not to mention tanking the idea, the concept can be a really tough sell in the locker room to guys who are still, showing up to work and practicing and putting their bodies on the line. I mean, you just can't justify it. But, you just look at these other elements, and I could see why some of you would say, "Oh, the Giants are tanking." So, again, I don't wanna believe that that's what's going on. I don't believe that's what's going on, but you look at these elements that I laid out for you, and it's really, really hard, I think, to wonder, you know, what exactly is going on inside 1925 Giants Drive? What are they doing? Because what they're not doing is playing quality football. They are supposedly sticking to their processes, which haven't worked all year long. I mean, wouldn't you want to change something if something wasn't working? So I don't know. I mean, I could see the point that that they're taking, but it's so unfortunate that we're even having this discussion because, like I said, I don't believe in it. I don't think any competitor worth his weight in gold would do it, but I guess there are ways to do it without doing it. And I don't know if that's true of the Giants, but the evidence sure stacks up, I would think. But anyway, coming up next, the Giants' latest injury report and how those injuries have exposed flaws in the roster building process. Don't go anywhere. I'll have that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, if you're like me, your holiday shopping list is far from being complete. And if you need something a little different, I've got the perfect gift for the passionate sports fan in your life. Ice Shaker bottles are officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, NBA, NCAA, and MLB, and they make ideal gifts. Created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers, Ice Shakers have changed the game with a workout bottle that's made of kitchen grade stainless steel that won't absorb odor like plastic bottles. This is the gift you've been looking for. Order for your team. You want a Giants bottle, you want a Mets bottle, a Yankees bottle, whatever team you follow. You can order for your favorite team branded bottles today at iceshaker.com and use our promo code Locked On NFL to get 25% off your order. Ice Shakers, show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market. Ice Shakers. Hey, Giant fans, today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks makes all your holidays bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 200 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away over $30 million dollars in rewards during Picksmas and are offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL in all lowercase letters to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to just keep rolling along. I get it. At this point, a lot of you were kind of checked out on the season, but there are still a few games left to go. And, obviously the Brian Daboll watch is going to be on, the Joe Shane watch is going to be on. And like I said, there are still games to go. Thursday, we're going to have the crossover show with Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens. So hopefully you'll want to tune in for all that stuff. And I'll try and get some guests for you so that you can get some different perspectives, especially as we start to turn towards the draft and the offseason and all that stuff. So, all right, in this segment, let's talk about the Giants' injury situation and how that is exposing the Giants roster building approach from this past year. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but it just seems like whenever the Giants have had an influx of injuries, it always seems to affect the positions that they don't address in free agency or in the draft. I mean, it's like Murphy's Law. So this year, you see the offensive line getting banged up. You see cornerback being banged up. You see the defensive line being banged up. All three positions that the Giants really didn't address in the offseason. So let me just run down the latest real quick for you. John Runyon Jr., the left guard, he's got an ankle injury that Brian Daboll said is now week to week, if not longer. I'm taking that to mean that Runyon probably won't play the rest of the year. And I also, reading between the lines, it sounds to me like it's a high ankle sprain, which if that's what it is, good luck because that could take a long time to heal. John Michael Schmidt suffered a neck injury. Now, he, I believe, underwent an MRI. The feeling is that he's sore, but I can guarantee you he's going to be on the injury report in all likelihood on Wednesday. I'd be surprised if he's not. Drew Lock is sore. He had an MRI. I saw him yesterday at the game. He went into the x-ray room. I think it was something with his foot. So we'll see how that works out. And then, of course, you've got the cornerbacks. You've got Cordell Flott with a knee, Deonte Banks with a rib, Drew Phillips with a shoulder. Those guys are all banged up and they missed the game. The defensive line, we've talked about that. Nacho still has, the burner. We'll see if he's able to practice. But Dexter Lawrence and DJ Davidson are done for the year. So looking at all these injuries, how much do you just say, wow, the Giants, who are their young cornerbacks, for example, in the pipeline? They don't really have them. You could say, well, Trey Hawkins is one, but other than that, do they have enough depth at cornerback? They haven't. And I've been saying this going back to the preseason when the Giants tried to sign veteran help in free agency, weren't able to do so. Then from the draft, they made the decision to bring in Brian Burns, which has been a good decision, by the way, but they had to give up basically getting a cornerback in here. You look at the offensive line, okay? What young talent is really in the pipeline for the Giants that you could sit there and say, well, there's an injury, you can plug this guy in and you don't have to worry about him. Can't say that right now. Joshua Zudu, they've got him playing at tackle. He's not a tackle because basically they don't have anybody else to step in there because of the injuries. All right. Jake Kubas, who has been inactive all year, they had to have him play and, maybe he turns into something down the line, but I can't honestly say he looked, like I would say, wow, they've got something there, and it just goes on and on with this team. So you sit here and you say, well, why didn't they add guys so that they could get these guys ready, make them a year-long project, get them ready, work on their technique, and then put them into the lineup if you need them. That's the approach, if you think about it, they took with Evan Neal. Even though Evan Neal had had a couple of years or 3 years or whatever it was of experience, they basically tore down whatever he learned and rebuilt him. And Evan Neal, with the exception of really one game, hasn't played that badly. The same can't be said, though, about the other guys, some of whom, again, are playing out of position and some of whom just really don't belong on an NFL team. So you just look at this, and I get it. Look, I'm not saying the Giants are mind readers. They couldn't possibly have predicted that the offensive line would get ransacked by injuries, or that the defensive line would get wrecked by injuries, or that cornerback would suffer, depth issues. And I've said many times that you can never fill every single need in an offseason. You just can't. But it just seems like, whenever they have a season like what they're having now, usually there's a ton of injuries at one particular area, and they're left scrambling to get everything, to get enough guys to play and make it through a game. And it's just really unfortunate. And that, you could point to Joe Shane about that. for not bringing in the talent. You can point to the coaching staff for not developing what's there. Whoever you want to blame, it just seems to be a problem with this team year in and year out. And it contributes to the seasons that we're seeing. So, what's the answer? Look, I get it. Joe Shane wanted to add a cornerback last year, for example, wasn't able to do so. But, you sit there and you wonder, there's got to be a way. I mean, whether it be an undrafted free agent, whether it be a veteran that you're taking a flyer on. And the Giants, if you think about it, they haven't really had as much of a success rate with those guys. They bring in every year. It seems like they bring in a dozen receivers, and of them, guys come and go. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that this whole injury situation has been a problem for the Giants because they just don't have enough depth to fill out some of these injury issues. And that is huge. That's a big reason why I suspect this team, one of the many reasons why I think this team is just where it's at right now. All right, folks, coming up next, Brian Daboll. With each loss that passes, how close is he to being shown the door, or is he close to being shown the door? We'll discuss it right after this. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if they win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and let's talk about Brian Daboll because, with each loss that piles up, and at this point, I question if the Giants are going to win a game this season. Okay. I mean, if they were going to win anything, Sunday's game against the Saints would have been their best opportunity. You might say that maybe they could etch one out against the Colts, but I'm not convinced that they're going to beat the Colts. I don't think they beat the Ravens on Sunday. And even, again, they have the Eagles at the end of the year. If by then the Eagles decide, oh, we're going to sit all our starters for the playoffs, I don't even know if the Giants' backups are good enough to beat the Eagles' backups. That's how bad this team has deteriorated. So, that all being said, what happens to Brian Daboll? Is there a case to keep him? Now, I've talked about this before, but the biggest case that I think if you're arguing for him to stay right now is that you could say, well, look at all the injuries that have piled up. You could look at the offensive line, you could look at the defensive line, you could look anywhere you want. But you know what? To me, that's not a good enough excuse because every team has injuries. Not every team has depth to replace the injured players. That's the big difference there. So I don't think you could even use that as an excuse if you're Joe Shane and you want to fight for Daboll. All right. As I look at this, the more and more I look at it, and I want to say this much. I like Brian as a person. I like him as a coach. I think he can be a good coach, but just the stubbornness is what's starting to just make me sit here and say, what are we doing here? The not willing to change. I talked about some of the processes that we always hear about. Daboll's still calling the plays. The way he's gotten the team ready in the summertime. I've talked about all this before. More recently, the Giants have looked like an undisciplined bunch, okay? Over the last 2 weeks, 25 penalties in the last 2 games. Where's the pride? All right. Now, the Giants, I think they're like 12th or middle of the pack in terms of the most penalized teams in the in the NFL. But think about it. I think their number was at 86 last I checked, but 25 over the last 2 weeks. All right. Are guys just checking out? Are guys just winging it? What's going on here? Why are so many penalties coming up? Now, some of the penalties, yes, they're done on purpose. Like, for example, a delay of game to give the punting team maybe 5 extra yards, or maybe, a delay of game to draw a team offside. I get that. But 25 in the last 2 games, that's just ridiculous. Where's the pride? Where's the discipline? You get, guys who are ineligible downfield. You get guys who are illegal, formation. This is all stuff that should not be happening this late in the season, but yet it is. So you can question and say, well, what's going on here? Why is this team having so many penalties? I've talked also about the play calling. All right. Daboll, and we know this from, when he was with Buffalo, he seems to lean more into the passing game. Well, you know what? Is this team really built right now for the passing game? No, it's not. It's not. The quarterback situation is a mess, right? Drew Lock, who's the starter right now, is doing better as a runner than he is as a passer. And I gave you the stats at the top of the show about what the Giants are averaging per game in the passing game over their last 171 yards in their last 3 games. That's not winning football, right? And this is despite the fact that they have a number one receiver, Malik Neighbors, who, by the way, Sunday played a full game or practically a full game and didn't really get involved again until the second half. Why? I don't understand what they're doing. If if you want to be a passing offense, wouldn't you want to get your playmakers involved early on? Why are you saving them until later? I really, truly do not understand the thinking. And, I've tried asking that question and I don't get a straight answer from anybody. It's just, oh, well, we have plays called, but we didn't get to them. Come on. How can that be? I mean, are you letting the defense dictate to you what you're doing? Or are you taking the attitude, we're just going to run and we're going to run what we want to run and good luck stopping us? That to me just doesn't seem to fly. So, you've got that element, the discipline, like I said, the injuries. I mean, more and more, it's making the case to keep Daboll for another year harder. Now, I don't know what the Giants are going to do at the end of the year. I do suspect that Joe Shane will be back because, again, John Mara spoke about wanting stability. Not that the situation is stable. I don't think we can say that it's stable. But, I don't necessarily think that Daboll and Shane are attached at the hip. I think if Daboll comes back, he's going to have to make more changes to his coaching staff, and that's going to be hard because, let's face it, who's going to come here knowing that, okay, at best, maybe Daboll's got one more year as a lame duck because if he doesn't get this team back on track next year, he's out. That's going to be a hard sell to bring in quality assistants. So wouldn't it make sense then rather to say that, okay, Brian, make changes to your coaching staff, doesn't it make sense at that point to just start all over? Now, granted, it's going to set the franchise back a little bit, which you don't want to do if you don't have to. Because think about it. You bring in a new head coach, he's going to bring in all new assistants, maybe new systems. And now, guys like Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, Bobby Okereke, they've got to go through another system. They've got to learn it again. And meanwhile, there's no guarantee that next year, if you bring in a new coach, that the Giants are going to win and make the playoffs. So now you've just wasted another year of all these guys who are in their prime. So it's a very, very tricky situation. But that being said, what's that old saying about insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So I'm curious to see how this all plays out. Right now, despite all the arguments that I've kind of laid out that are stacking up against Brian Daboll, I do think he's back next year. But each passing week, I'm telling you, it's harder and harder and harder to justify his return. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. I'll have a brand new episode for you. Until then, have a good one.